can't hear the mayor. Sorry, this is the deputy corporate officer speaking. I'm on remotely and I can't hear anything on this meeting yet.
Okay. Can you hear us now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Shall we start all over? No, we're good.
So we can call to order. Yeah.
Okay. On that note, happy Valentine's Day, everybody. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? Moved by Councillor Carrera, seconded by Councillor Youssef. All those in favor, voted unanimous. Motion has been. We're good?
Yep.
Oh, were you supposed to do something?
No, it's okay, sir. If you don't mind, I'm just going to jump in and just say procedurally certain things that we want to make sure people are aware of. The meeting is being live streamed and recorded and will be available to the public for playback on our website in accordance with Council Policy 3.12. And the primary purpose of Council Workshop meeting is the receipt of information, review and discussion of policies and other matters of interest to Council and to make decisions related to such matters as required. This meeting is being conducted through the city's One Meeting platform. And in the interim, until we can get the electronic voting completely implemented, we would ask that councillors in the room use their cards, green, yellow, and red, if they're in favor, if they have a point of order, or if they are opposed. That would be the red. To be put on the speakers list, please physically raise your hand so that the mayor can add you to his list. And if you could also please be as kind as to show your cards in front of the camera so that we can make sure it's on the recording and can log the proper votes. Okay, with that, sir, that's all I have.
Okay, so we've already approved the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes? Moved by Councillor Tan, seconded by Councillor Carreras. All those in favor? It is unanimous. The motion has been passed. We are now going to move on to presentations. Unfinished and new business.
Thank you, sir. The first item on our agenda is the Yenadin lands, introduction of the M7 employment park zone. And I believe that Ms. Grokovich is going to be doing the presentation.
Good morning, Mayor and Council.
Good morning.
Always a bit of a guess for this. That looks different. Okay, so this morning we're going to be going over the M7, the proposed M7 employment park zone, which is being proposed to be used in the Yenadin lands. So essentially what we're looking at is where is this zone going to be used and what sort of elements are being proposed to be included within it, recognizing that the implementation of a concept plan is really an integration of policy, development permit guidelines, and zoning regulations. The policy and the development permit guidelines that are in effect in the Yenadin lands are not the focus of this morning's conversation. We are really focusing on the zone for the purposes of this conversation. So before, there was a lovely little slide that you'll all have to imagine that shows the Yenadin lands essentially nestled south of Silver Valley, north of the urban area boundary. It's running along 232, 128. The historic Yenadin neighborhood is just northeast of here. And then the map on the screen before you is really that close-up of what these properties look like. So the Yenadin lands largely consist of about 13 properties, approximately 63 acres. The sizes range between half an acre to 10 acres, depending where you are within the area. And these were originally of interest because they were identified back in 2014 as being relatively flat. There was servicing nearby, they're on transportation routes. So in our commercial and industrial strategy, it was encouraged that we take a look at this for future employment needs. Looking broader than the Yenadin lands, we can see that there's an existing residential neighborhood to the west as well as the south, and then some larger lot, often in the ALR, to the east and north. Before we delve into the M7 zone, there's just two development applications that I would like you to be aware of. The first is the corner lot. So while this property is considered within the Yenadin lands area, it isn't necessarily considered under the policy scheme. This application has come forward to rezone to a commercial service commercial zone. So this application is sitting at third reading as well. And then under the CS1, a range of uses are permitted, including assembly, liquor store, personal and professional services, restaurants, food services. So this is essentially the commercial core of the Yenadin lands going forward. And then the next one I just wanted to bring your attention to is and council may recall that an exclusion application has come forward to remove this property from the ALR, and the ALC currently has this application is under consideration. We are waiting to hear back on, waiting to hear from the ALC on this application. So with that, the Yenadin lands, as I mentioned briefly earlier, really came out of a conversation in 2014 as one of the potential areas in the city that would be able to have a future employment use. So in 2015, staff set off looking for a range of employment lands within the city. Between 2015 and 2018, work took place in a couple of different corners of the community. And then in 2019, we were able to take a renewed look at what Yenadin lands could be. So the public engagement process, the policy work largely took place between 2019 and 2021. And the concept plan that kind of came out of all those processes is currently captured within 3 official community plan amending bylaws, which are sitting at third reading. So the slide before you is pulled from an earlier PowerPoint, and it's really just to give a really high-level overview of the concept and the principles that form the baseline of the Yenadin Lands concept plan, and now those 3 official community plan amending bylaws. So since the intent of the Yenadin lands is to create a complete community with services and jobs within a 10-minute walk or bike ride, it is intended to be smaller scale to fit within the existing context. So the proposed M7 employment park zone, in a lot of cases, is very similar to the M3 business park zone that we have already, a version of which you can see in the Maple Meadows Business Park today. So what we're next going to go through is essentially the really subcategories that most zones have in our zoning bylaw, which essentially identify what is allowed and how does it fit on the site. So in terms of what is allowed, we're looking at softer employment uses for this area, again, largely because of the context with where it's located. We're looking for opportunities to expand our educational and training services within the community, expanding the support and production of media services, as well as some more opportunities to grow our budding micro industries, whether that be beer, wine, or artisanal production. The list on the screen before you is in alphabetical order as opposed to priority, but it gives you an idea of the types of uses that we're looking at. And in terms of a zoning bylaw conversation or language, we do tend to use broader terms where possible in the zoning bylaw, and all of these terms will have definitions embedded in the zoning bylaw to give a little bit more detail. But essentially, we're looking at broad terms for ease and efficiency. And then another small note about zoning bylaw terminology is we regulate land use through the zoning bylaw as opposed to ownership or user. So we are solely looking at land use. And then in terms of supporting those principal uses, we have what's called accessory uses. So these are intended to be smaller, often no more than 15 or 20% of either the use or the site. And they're generally intended to support that primary use. In this case, we're looking at office, business services, in some cases, retail and storage. But in terms of retail and storage, these wouldn't be those primary uses. Like this is to kind of help facilitate that primary business use. And I would just take a note that caretaker residential is included, and this is largely what's used to permit overnight security being able to stay on the property. Of course, with what's allowed also comes what we would like to not see on the site. So the currently proposed list of uses that we aren't considering for the Yenadin lands would include outdoor storage. This is fairly typical for an employment park or a business park use. We're not looking for those heavy industrial uses. We want this park to be a good neighbor to the existing residences. Residential is not currently proposed to be included, as well as that larger primary use of storage. So again, if it's supporting a primary use, there's a way to permit it, but those mini storage units isn't necessarily proposed to go forward at this point, largely because we are looking for higher job densities than this in this particular area. Next up is what the lot characteristics can look like. So in the policy portion, there are consolidation requirements so that we will pull together a number of lots and then essentially subdivide them to the minimum lot areas. They can be larger than this, but these are just those minimum lot area or those minimum lot characteristics for what these future lots could look like. Again, this is very similar to the M3, so it's a fairly standard employment park or industrial park zone width, depth, and area for our community. From there, we look at what can fit on the lot. So we regulate this with two particular pieces, lot coverage, and then the floor space ratio, which we'll touch on in just a moment. So the example on the screen before you is a residential example, but it does illustrate kind of how we calculate what counts towards lot coverage and what does not. And again, similar to the M3, the proposed 60% lot coverage is the same. So as mentioned in the zoning bylaw, we do often use floor space ratio or FSR to measure our density, which is essentially the ratio between building to land. On the screen, you can see a couple of examples to show how, in particular, those two middle ones, what one FSR can look like in a couple of different options. So for the M7, we are proposing 0.75, so not quite that one FSR. And then within that 0.75 FSR, all of the other zone requirements and design standards will need to be met. It can be lower than 0.75. An application can come forward with less than a 0.75, but they can't come forward above that. So going back to that concept that we've touched on in terms of neighborhood fit, from the commercial and industrial strategy, as well as through the conversations with the community, we've been very clear that this type of development will need to be a good neighbor and a good fit in this particular location. So one of the ways that this translates is in terms of building height. So what's proposed is to essentially split the larger 13 properties or those larger 60 acres in half. The western portion will have a reduced height, recognizing that they are neighbors to an existing residential development, and then one on the east will have a slightly higher height. So the height for the western portion is proposed currently at 11 meters, and this is equivalent to a single detached home today. So it will be a similar height to what is already there. And then on the eastern portion, we're able to pop it up a little bit to that 15 height, which is a fairly standard business park height across the region. How that building fits. May I have the next slide, please? On the site is governed by setbacks. So typically each zone comes with 4 setbacks. We're looking at the front, back, and the 2 sides. The proposed setbacks for this zone are slightly larger than what is proposed or what is included in the M3, largely to accommodate to that existing setback. We're looking for a bigger setback anywhere it is touching a residential area. When you're farther into the site and it will be an industrial or an employment park use next to an employment park use, there is some flexibility to bring it down a little bit. They're more likely, they're less likely to be bad neighbors to each other in that instance, but we are trying to maintain that buffer to the existing residential neighborhood. And then the last couple of elements, there isn't necessarily a slide for, but of course there's other pieces that are either captured in other elements of the zoning bylaw or other bylaws that will speak to, say, noise mitigation, to again trying to keep everything contained within the lot. Lighting doesn't exceed the property lines, minimum landscaping and fencing requirements, and of course parking is regulated by the off-street parking and zoning bylaw. So this is really what the M7 is proposed to look like at this point in time. So in terms of next steps, should council direct, we're looking for direction to come back with the M7 elements translated into a zone amending bylaw format. It's being proposed to come forward for first reading. Following first reading, it would move forward through the reading process in conjunction with the development application. At this point in time, development applications are allowed to come in, providing that they do align with the concept plan, and they would be able to proceed till third reading until the OCP policy and the design permit guidelines have been adopted. Which brings us to the report recommendation, which is on the screen before you. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Before we move on, can I get a motion to moved by Councillor Youssef, seconded by Councillor Carreras. All those in favor? Oh, no, sorry. I'm just testing you.
That's right.
Now we can get a speakers list going. I like to jump ahead.
And through the chair to council, if you could please just raise your cards, yellow cards, so that we could put you into the speakers list right over here so we can start the timers.
Is yellow speaker list or that point of order? It's green.
It's green, sorry.
Yeah. So I take it those are not point of orders. Okay, we've got Councillor Schiller followed by Councillor Youssef.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Amanda, for that presentation, and I appreciate the effort that staff have put into this and to, incorporate this into an existing neighborhood. I know in a lot of ways it is a big change for the neighborhood. It is something I'm happy to see going ahead, and I just sort of had a couple questions about maybe some particulars on the site, and I don't know if we're there yet with those details, but I know that there is like a water course that runs through the property, and so I imagine that just like setbacks for that water course would just fall within individual lots, and if I guess I'm just sort of wondering about the overall plan for that water course to ensure that it's protected. And is there any plans to allow, public access along there at all and have that sort of be a recreational feature of the area?
Through the chair, the two answers to the question are, of course, all water courses do align with our environmental setbacks. So Coho Creek is fish bearing, so it is largely considered a 30-meter setback. In certain areas, it may be able to be reduced subject to very particular site characteristics, but we will be looking at that at a site-by-site basis. So any of the water courses on the property will comply with our natural features DP and all of our other environmental policy. And the design guidelines does indicate that there will be it's considered a 5-meter right-of-way, but it's essentially a 2.5-meter trail that will come outside of the ESA or the environmentally sensitive area before the property line. That will be an integrated trail network to be used by both residents and business tenants.
Great, thank you. And can you just remind me what the parking bylaw is for this particular area? Like what the number of required parking spots is?
I'm happy to get you that information. I don't remember off the top of my head, but on that note, we do have the review of the off-street parking bylaw under review. So through that, we are taking a closer look at the industrial parking ratios. Okay. Since we would like to obviously maintain best practices. And I do know from a regional perspective, we're looking at ways to encourage transit and active transportation elements to industrial sites. And this particular site is also eligible to do I forget the official name from TransLink, but essentially they have a range of options that can be required either at the land use or at the owner's level that can encourage transit passes, bike parking, and a couple of other options to, again, kind of help facilitate that transition from the car culture.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think because this is going in an existing neighborhood, it would be great to see whatever options we could provide to people to not necessarily take their cars, although that will continue, obviously, to be a way that people do conduct business. I would definitely be more interested in that, those transit incentives as well, just as we move forward through the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to Councillor Youssef, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to staff for the report and presentation. Is the M7 zone going to be limited to the Yenadin lands, or can we see this zoning occurring in other places in our municipality is my first question through the chair to staff.
Through the chair, at this point in time, it is intended for the Yenadin lands, but it does not need to be limited to the Yenadin lands. So I think this is where the conversation is at this moment. If it is something that you would like to see elsewhere, that is certainly something that can be accommodated.
Okay, thank you for that, because my next question was going to be where else would we see this in our community or in our city? But thus far as I understand, staff don't really have many more options, if any, other than the Yenadin lands.
Mr. Goddard,
So,
sorry,
is that-
Mr. Goddard.
Thank you. It's a very good question. This zone could be universally applied, but it's really geared and designed to be a sensitive insertion of a job creation within more of a residential and environmentally sensitive areas. So there are lots of other areas we could maybe consider on a much smaller scale as we start looking at wanting to develop more job opportunities in other areas of the city. But I think this is much more sensitive than our general industrial zones, as the purpose of the uses are much more limited, and therefore it's quite flexible, I think.
Thank you for that. And I believe that is the way or one of the ways to go about creating jobs, and having zones like this that are industrial and predominantly employment driven coexist and fit within existing residential neighborhoods, as well as, of course, taking into consideration our environmental pieces, as was mentioned by Councillor Schiller when it comes to our waterways. I have a question, Mr. Chair, on the sizes of the lots that are being allocated under this zone. Did we come to the parameters of that through a market research? Is this based on demand and what's being desired on the market, or is this through comparator municipalities that have similar zoning?
Through the chair, to answer your last part first, no, we didn't do a municipal analysis of other industrial lots in the region. It is largely based on the options we have available in the community today, finding that fit, and then based on the types of development applications that we've seen come in, what we're like the lot dimensions are essentially as small as you can go and still fit everything on the site in a usable format. So there's no requirement that they have to be the 2,000 square meters. They can come in at 4, 6, that part, the maximum, there's no maximum identified. It's just, if somebody came in, we want them to be able to fit all of the zone requirements on the site and still have a usable space.
Good, thank you for that. I wouldn't want to limit the maximum lot size, of course, because of the example that you mentioned, that some operations will require more space than others, and some properties are bigger than others. I'm trying to compare M7 to M3. So aside from the bigger setbacks and the lot sizes, are there many differences between the two zones?
Through the chair, the list of principal uses is a bit different. Okay. So the business park industrial, that traditional one, it's broader. It's designed to go in a number of places within the community and really be that easy to fit job opportunity zone. So it's definitely less prescriptive than M7 in terms of uses. And then there's a couple. Most of the other things are quite similar. It's really at the use level, and then the setback piece, again, trying to be that good neighbor, and then the height. The M3 is 15 meters across the board.
Thank you for that. With this, with the M7 zoning, through the chair to staff, will we have, I would imagine, stricter environmental standards to meet, noise and light as possible, as well as emissions, if possible, because of the nature of where we're trying to fit this in. When would council expect to have a more detailed list, if you will, of those regulations and what we would be looking at?
Through the chair, so it is a bit of an integration between our general regulations through a number of bylaws throughout the community. So pieces of work that we already have in effect tied to the design guidelines. I believe it was Appendix B in your package for this report. And this is where we delve into the very specifics in terms of lighting, noise, fencing, what this looks like in the community specific to the Yennet Inlands. So that's that piece that Mr. Goddard was referring to earlier that is very tailored to this area. It can go elsewhere, but at the moment it is very specific, taking into account the environmental components and the context here. So there's a lot of detail in that document.
Thank you for that. Two more questions, Mr. Chair. One on the FSR of 0.75. Is that again a number that we came to through what's occurring in our neighborhood, in our municipality, sorry, or is it based on market demand?
It's based on largely based on our community and what we've seen come in while still being able to meet those other objectives.
Thank you kindly. And lastly, when we're talking about employment and the number of jobs, as was mentioned by Councillor Schiller, when we're now looking at parking, will the parking for the different zones vary according to either the number of jobs or possibly the size of the site? Is that what we're considering? Or how would we be able to reconcile the fact that we want to get the maximum number of jobs, but yet the site may be limited in space to accommodate that parking? And of course, realizing that this is on a transit corridor to a good extent, and hopefully there will be that option available. But in the meantime, and of course, for access of delivery of goods as well is what I'm thinking of. Do we have kind of guidelines to go forward that would be specific to this zone as opposed to our parking bylaw?
Through the chair, the design guidelines don't get into that level of detail. We would typically use the off-street and loading bylaw to speak to those components. Since it is under review, I think this is an excellent time to hear that feedback. It lets us bring it back and have that conversation, recognizing that we are trying to implement those best practices. At very high level, there is certainly the flexibility to make specific requirements by zone. I do believe we also often do it by use. So we can take that back and we'll be able to bring that forward under that conversation.
I would be most grateful. Thank you for that. And yes, I would ultimately would like to see that as we proceed to get as many jobs as possible, that we're able to also have that flexibility in our regulations to be able to permit more parking if required. Thank you again for those answers, the presentation and the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those are my questions and comments.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to Councillor Carreras, followed by Councillor Tan.
Thank you very much. Just a couple of questions around the principal uses, just because I'm learning what they all mean. I actually kind of like the mix. It seems like it's going to build a community hub and a variety of hours and uses. Great to have a childcare center right across from the largest elementary school in the district. It's very, very needed. What does civic mean?
Civic is a subcategory of institutional. So typically libraries, leisure center, it really just opens up the opportunity for what you would consider often a government service, not necessarily. And that's again coming down to a land use as opposed to ownership conversation, but it's very similar to institutional.
Okay, thank you. And then just scrolling down, I like the media production and the medical library, especially medical laboratory piece, because those are quite often higher paid professional jobs, which are needed within our community. And a lot of people will be able to walk to work and their kids could be across the street. Like it seems like a really good fit there. And those businesses tend to set up and then stay here just based on the setup. A quick question on microbrewery, micro winery, micro distillery. What are the sort of parameters that they're able to? So is a microbrewery under this able to have like a patio or set up? And then again, because I'm learning how they're all set up in our community, are they allowed to serve food or no?
Through the chair. So the micro prefix to all of these terms is really to indicate that it's not going to be this large scale, massive
Yeah.
behemoth type, right? So it's really saying it's all these same uses. It's designed for those craft breweries, craft wineries. Where it gets a little bit special is that, of course, we have to overlay the regulations from other provincial agencies. So pending they do not change the regulations, yes, they are permitted to have a patio space or a retail space, and that's where we see that being mirrored in our accessory use component. And I do believe they are able to offer food. Whether or not that can be manufactured on site or that food truck component is going to depend on their scope and scale and those other provincial agencies.
Okay. And then the other question I have is the microbreweries, do they fall under, because I do believe there is a bylaw around organizations that serve alcohol or sell alcohol, and the proximity to, I'm just curious about the proximity to the school and the childcare center and how that would fit in.
Through the chair, that I believe that comes into effect more at the licensing stage. So
Okay.
from a land use perspective, it's allowed, because we're looking at it, not to say that the Unit school is going anywhere, but in theory, we could have a situation where the educational facility leaves. Not to suggest that it's going to occur, but that's just where that balance is. So it's permitted. And then at the licensing stage, this is where we start layering in some of those other elements.
So if we permit it, because this is something that I think a lot in the community kind of like being able to walk down the craft brewery scene, and the micro distillery scene is kind of a real expanding, especially in sort of the younger set, which lives around there. If we allow it, or is it actually able to be set up based on licensing?
I believe so.
Sorry,
Yeah.
am I asking like really strange questions here?
No. So the zoning bylaw dictates the range of permitted uses.
Yeah.
Then there are other policies or regulations within the bylaw that are really specific to minimum distance separations. So it is quite likely that we could have cannabis retail is a great example.
Mhm.
That's where we take a real close look at the minimum distance between cannabis retail stores. So someone would be in a zone, say C3, our town center commercial zone, which says you can have cannabis retail, but it'll say also subject to used to be section 402. Not sure what it is in the new bylaw. And then that's when we really start to drill down. So if you're referring to a use that has a minimum distance, we would be looking at each property on a site-by-site basis as they came in to get a business license or a building permit.
Okay, I just want to make sure if we put it in as an approved land of use, it actually can be used as that with like I just want to make sure the other regulation doesn't come in and prevent people from being able to set up that if we approve it.
So the other regulations, just to be clear, could restrict the use depending on where the business is being proposed within the business park.
Okay.
If that is possible, it could happen.
Okay. And then the other quick question is personal repair services. Is that like auto repair?
Through the chair, it does not include auto repair. It's typically computers, vacuums.
Okay.
It can be smaller appliances. The regulation or the definition does indicate what is not included under that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I think that's it for the questions I have right now. Interesting list. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Tan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just in terms of the format of this discussion, are we doing second rounds? Should I limit my questions to a certain number?
If we need a second round, we'll go second round.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Well, through the chair to staff, first of all, well, in terms of comments, I think, well, thank you to staff. And I think this is a great discussion. I think about where we have been talking about where our city wants to go in terms of unparalleled access to nature, economic hotspot, and having community being able to have local employment options. I think this is an option we certainly is a good option in front of us and on the table. And I can appreciate it. It's a delicate balance to make sure that we have local employment opportunities all the environmental protections and put it all in one city. I appreciate that it's a delicate balance. So thank you to staff for your work on this, and also the previous council. And in terms of my questions, I want to pick up on what Councillor Schiller and what Councillor Youssef were talking about in terms of transportation options. Being mindful that it was really hard for to find a piece of land for employment opportunities when we don't want it to all turn into too much of it to turn into parking spaces. I just want to ask a little more about the transportation options down here, whether it's, I'm curious about transit, whether in our strategic transportation plan or whether in our plans for future that we do, TransLink has indicated that there will be public transit down to this area from our residential centers. I'm curious about our active transportation routes. I'm curious about our sidewalks and lighting. So just what can you tell me about transportation, non-personal use motorized vehicle alternatives to the site?
So through the chair, we did have this conversation with TransLink when we were putting together the policy and the DP guideline component. And that's where they were able to provide their guidelines to kind of help encourage what they would like to see in terms of transportation access. So as far as I'm aware, there is a bus that runs both down 232 and 128 that connect to the Haney Place Transit Hub. And through those conversations with TransLink, there was certainly conversation about ways that may be able to improve access in terms of Port Haney and the West Coast Express. So those conversations took place. I believe at the time the strategic transportation plan was still at its infancy. So those comments were provided back to our transportation group. And then there is an equestrian trail as well as standards for bike routes. I just can't recall off the top of my head if it's on the north or south side of 128. And then there is also a bike route or a multi-use pathway that's planned for 232. So the properties will be framed with options for active transportation, the exact standards of which, of course, our transportation department kind of oversees those components. The design guidelines certainly speak to it defers that level of response. It defers to the experts in that area. With development would come sidewalks, access, lighting. I'm sorry, I think I missed a part of your question.
Yeah, thank you. That answers a lot of it, transit. And as we build out the STP, the strategic transportation plan, I'm sure we'll hear more about it and about connectors through that area. I also want to make sure, I just also want to put a pin in it to ensure that there is lighting, pedestrian sidewalks, active transportation routes within the site. And I know the one thing that maybe new development within the area wouldn't cover is pedestrian connection into the area from other neighborhoods in terms of sidewalks, streetlights, that kind of thing, which, we kind of expect a developer working within the site to pay for. Maybe staff can tell me a little bit about, or through the chair, maybe staff can tell me a little bit about sort of what we have looked at, the work that's been done in this area.
So through the chair, recognizing the environmental sensitivity of the area, we did have quite a bit of conversation in terms of how best to integrate that trail network within the area. So we do have provisions to have that trail that runs along the environmentally sensitive area as an amenity. And then there are design guidelines that certainly speak to the need for any pedestrian, non-motorized component to be accessible, safe for all users. There will be interior lighting on the streets. And in very select locations, there is the ability to go from the Yenadin lands out. Essentially anything to the south, there will not be any permeability because there's a creek. But we have the opportunity kind of coming out of where the proposed roads are going to be to offer some integration into the residential community. And then it would connect to the intersection at 128 and 232 to kind of go eastward. And yes.
Thank you. Very well said. And maybe I would just add that we are working through the strategic transportation plan. We have identified 232nd as a primary multimodal route and 128th as a secondary multimodal route. And so as that plan develops and as we start to bring projects to fruition, we'll be fitting those in to the scale of the development. We also have the multi-use path along Abernathy Way to the south. So there's connectors to and from that multi-use path and multimodal network as well.
Thank you, staff. And the reason why I'm spending a bunch of time on this item is because I think about our climate goals, and I think about our promise to residents of unparalleled access to nature. I want to make sure that any new development that we put in is really satisfies our stewardship component to the environment and to the climate. And because I can really see here families moving into Silver Valley, into the downtown center area, into the areas along the Abernathy Way, and folks biking in, taking transit in, even walking in. So I just want to really make sure that those options are available for folks. The second piece that I want to look at here when it comes to environmental and climate stewardship, it's around the building guidelines for industrial buildings. Maybe staff can loop me in. I haven't looked into this about the standards around our requirements, if anything, around the step code, about the carbon pollution standards that have come in, that recently come into the province.
Through the chair, the design guidelines have been designed to be able to accommodate those changes in the building code and the newer carbon pollution standards. The design guidelines really speak to form and character, and we fully acknowledge that there are going to be some design challenges integrating lower emission standards with the type of form that we would like to see in order to facilitate eyes on the street and a more comfortable urbanscape. So those conversations are really going to take place once we have a development application. All I can really say is we're very much aware of it and the conversations are taking place, but how exactly that is going to materialize, we're waiting for information from the province. And then of course, when the development applications come forward.
Mr. Goddard.
Thank you. I remind council that these guidelines are probably the most comprehensive we have in the city and most modern for what we're planning to do here. We do not know the type of development we're going to get here in a sense of the form. It could be large buildings, it could be smaller buildings. We're trying to design the uses and the design guidelines to deal with smaller buildings, smaller forms, multiple lots. So when we get to that point with applicants coming in, this criteria will be applied to each and every application with an overall vision on what we want to achieve here as outlined in the guidelines and the zone, but we will have to be a lot of finessing with each applicant to make them fit into those boxes we've outlined here. So that you will see all of that as they come forward in individual applications, and we'll have to explain to you how it fits into the puzzle of the overall Yenadon area. So it's an ongoing piece of work.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate that each individual application will be different. And maybe I don't know much about design code, and maybe I would appreciate, I just want to put a pin in there if it's appropriate and at the right time. I'd appreciate a briefing on that or more information on that about what our legislative requirements are and how we work with each applicant to make sure that it is not restrictive for them, but it allows us to create this fulsome picture of really a vintage innovation hub that is the good steward to the environment, and also at the same time really permits for economic growth in our community. And I'm just really mindful about doing this upfront so that, as staff has said multiple times, don't do policy work on the back of an application. And so I just really want to be mindful of that and put a pin in that. And again, emphasizing that'd be very interested in that conversation. The third thing that I want to talk about is concerns about trucking down to this neighborhood. I mean, to some degree, it is inevitable because it is a light industrial area, and I know that's a lot of concern in the neighborhood. Maybe staff could speak to that.
Through the chair, we've certainly heard concerns through the public engagement process that what that could look like and what sort of impacts would be potentially anticipated for the residential community. It is our understanding that the larger scale vehicles coming into this site are anticipated to use 232nd and 128th. Unless they're lost, we're hoping they're not on a residential street. Of course, recognizing it'll depend on the type of use of the track in terms and where they're trying to locate on the site, right? So we can't say with any, and I'll hand it off in just a second, but we can't say with any certainty that they will never use a particular street. But of course, it is going to depend on where they're going, and our roads are intended to be used for the movement of goods and services into this area.
Okay, just we'll go to round two after these comments. Thank you.
And I'll just expand on that real briefly. And so we see the majority of trips into the area using Abernathy Way. Abernathy Way is currently into widening between 230th and 232nd now. As part of this application, piece of work when it came forward a while back, we started talking about that widening of Abernathy Way between 224th and 230th. So staff have proceeded with the design for that work, and now we're just looking for how to fund the construction of that project and what the timing of the Yenadin Lands development is, so we can support that with additional capacity on Abernathy Way.
Ms. Carter.
Thank you. I just thought I would add a bit to what Ms. Grokowicz was saying about the zone itself. When you look at the range of principal permitted uses that have been identified, the uses there were selected deliberately to identify uses that will be less impactful to the neighborhood, including transportation. It's not to say that the odd use won't have larger trucks going into it, but I believe that as a rule, when you look at the range of uses, they would not be uses that would be requiring large trucks. It would probably be a smaller type of trucks for delivery or pickup, those sorts of things. Thank you.
Thank you. Which brings, I'll make my comments here. You bring up an interesting point, because it's clear that a lot of attention is placed on the zoning here. But I think it warrants a conversation of how did we get to this part? Why are we paying so much attention to this? Where did we, what was like, why can't we just put in whatever M3 zone? Like, why are we paying so much attention to this? And I think it's important that people know where these decisions are coming from. Go ahead, Ms. Carter.
Thank you. So you're right, there's been a lot of attention placed on this zone, and it actually goes back to when we first did the commercial industrial strategy. The strategy identified that we needed between 200 and 300 acres of industrial land to see us into the future. We have gone through a number of exercises with previous councils trying to identify areas that would be suitable for employment, and the lands that are in front of you are the best shot that we have as a community for creating employment, new employment lands in the short term. We went through a very detailed public consultation program. There was a design charrette. Amanda and that team provided a lot of opportunities to talk to the community. And the feedback that we were getting is, yes, people want employment, but obviously the people that live in that neighborhood were concerns about the impact. So that's how we got to where we are now, and why we're really placed a focus on trying to pick employment uses or industrial uses that are low impact. As Mr. Goddard said, we've created a set of design guidelines that are really far more detailed than we would typically see. And it's to really try to respond to the feedback from previous councils, as well as to respond to the concerns raised by those immediate neighbors.
So just to be clear, this is in response to feedback that was heard prior. The concerns of the neighbors that were brought up, and the choices of what goes in there are in large part based on the feedback that you received. That is correct.
Yes, and I think I should mention and just remind everyone that the land use designation, so the OCP amending bylaw to designate Yenadin for this use, is at third reading. It's been through public hearing and it's at third reading. We're awaiting some other approvals from other agencies before we can bring it back for final reading. The design guidelines were also ran parallel, so they're at third reading. And the reason we came forward today with the report around the zoning is that I know I've been fielding questions from people trying to understand what will this zone look like. I know the mayor's received calls from people, and I suspect other members of council, people saying, well, what is this M7 zone? Because it doesn't exist yet. And we've been trying to explain it. So we thought in, a real goal of complete transparency, we would bring this report to you to signal what we expect would be within the zone and what the uses would be and all the setbacks and the other regulations. And then what we're recommending is if council's comfortable with it, we would go back to the department, draft the actual amending bylaw and bring it to you to have a real a much closer look, and you would grant it first reading.
Thank you. I have one final question. So I understand that each one will individually have to come to council. Okay. How much control do we have, if that's the right word to use, to within these guidelines to say, we like that, but we don't like this? So I think from a perspective of the local neighborhood, this is all fine. But once this is passed, who's making those decisions?
Through the chair, it's a very good point. And with all of our development permit guidelines, they are documents that staff take and assess an application based upon them. So we will go through our process and essentially use them as a checklist and say they've met this condition, they've met this condition, they haven't met this condition, they've met these conditions. And we report back out to you on each application and where they meet it or not. They also have to go to the advisory design panel to get some comments on it. So that review is done when you're looking at rezoning the property. We are not at that point yet, but that's why these guidelines are so critical, because you should carefully review them to ensure that you're happy with them. And they are very detailed, the most detailed we have, and they will guide the form and character, landscaping, access, all those things of the developments you'll be seeing in the future. Now, in regards to the zone, remember, council, we cannot adopt a zone until we have a piece of property to attach it to. So all we can do at this point is give you the example of what that zone will be, have you fully informed on it, but we can't adopt it. The first application in this area will adopt the C7 zone when we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions or comments? Councillor Schiller, followed by Councillor Tan.
Thank you, Chair. Just as I work to get up to speed on this project, I just sort of had some questions about timeline. So this presentation is in regards to this zoning amendment bylaw. Are you able to put any sort of timeline on just sort of, going through the steps when you might anticipate that this would be finally adopted?
Through the chair, there's like specifically the zone or the OCP?
Well, I'm interested in
all of
both.
So in terms of the zone, should it be moved forward back to staff to bring forward that zone amending bylaw, we can come back for first reading in a relatively quick order. So we do know the development industry is quite interested in what this could look like. So having your comments today is extremely helpful. We'll be able to refine it and then bring that back again for council comment at a committee of the whole meeting. And then again, you have that opportunity to move it back to staff or to council for first reading. That's the easy part. The policy and the development permit guidelines are ready to come back for final. There's two components that we're waiting for more information on. One is that exclusion application request to the ALC. So we have submitted it. But we are waiting for the ALC to come back. We are hoping to have a response by the summer. It could be tomorrow, it could be June, right? We are subject to the ALC's timelines in that regard. Once that comes back, we are able to continue our conversation with the region. As you're aware, we have a regional growth strategy that was going forward for adoption, Metro 2050. We will be making an amendment request to Metro Vancouver to adjust their boundaries to include all of the Unedin lands. At this point in time, their boundary cuts through a couple of properties. So some of the Unedin lands is included, some of them aren't quite there. So we would make that amendment request, and then at which point we would bring back the OCP and the development permit guidelines for final adoption. We are hoping for more information from Metro in the coming weeks in terms of the timeline of Metro 2050. So in the absence of that information at this point in time, I would say if we are directed to bring back this report to the committee of the whole, we should have a stronger understanding of timeline at that point in time. And I'd be happy to update council once we have that information.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I just have to jump in for a second. Councillor Doze, were you just putting up your card to get on the speakers list, or did you actually have a point of order?
I was going to put myself on the speakers list, sir.
Okay, that's the green card. So after Councillor Schiller, that would be Councillor Doze, followed by Councillor Tan. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. That's very helpful. And just because there are a lot of pieces, so is it accurate to say that where we are right now, none of these properties, like have we had any development applications come forward for any of these properties under this concept?
Through the chair. So we did have the one in the corner for that commercial service commercial. And I do believe the applicant was quite interested in providing more of a commercial development. And we did know that there was a need for some commercial uses in this area. So we were able to make it work in terms of locating some commercial uses within the Unedin lands. I would say the remaining properties are of heavy interest to a number of applicants. I don't believe anyone has made an actual development application, but we are meeting and fielding questions from people quite regularly that are looking for the level of detail that now that we've kind of had this conversation, introduced the zone, it is easier to kind of facilitate what that M7 zone could look like with these potential applicants. And just a small point is if there is an individual or a group wishing to make a development application, we are able to receive it even with the policies not adopted. They'd be able to come in for their first reading report and we'd be able to facilitate until about third reading, and at which point they would sit until everything is adopted altogether. So anyone interested is certainly able to come in tomorrow if they so desired.
Thank you.
I would just like to add one point to that. We have had on the southernmost property, must be 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, an application for subdivision for single family homes. And council of the day considered it and would not proceed with it at that time. It was sent back. So there is interest certainly over the years for residential single family typical development here, but we've chosen for many years to move in a different direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Thank you very much. We're going to move to Councillor Doze.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I just wanted to say how excited I am to see this level of innovation from the staff, based, of course, on the feedback they got from the people of Maple Ridge to go for this amendment request. It is my understanding that this request is meant to provide a broad guideline for this particular new or novelty in our system. And I want to say that my excitement comes from the fact that it's going to affect positively the issue of our youth leaving the city, and of course our youth migrating and traveling to other places for work. And not to talk, of course, about the possibility of the impact of this on the income generation and distribution within the city. By this, I mean to say that I will urge my team members or mates to let us review this as quickly as possible and give staff the authority they need to go back and come back to us on this, because I see a level of urgency in passing this, because, like I said, being a member of the Economic Development Committee, I do know that the anxiety that our people face over this particular issue of unemployment and migration and all what have you, I think this is one of the things that we could do to kind of reduce, if not remove that level of anxiety. And this being the first time it's being done here, there's no doubt that the broad framework that we are going to establish at this time is subject to amendment and further amendment, tweaking, and all what have you as time goes on. I want to again to register my gratitude to staff for the effort put in this and urge my teammates to please let's move on this and as quickly as possible get this done with, because we need it like yesterday. It's already late. We need to get it done right now. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Doze. We're moving to Councillor Tan, followed by Councillor Carreras.
And this is round two.
Sorry,
This is round two.
this is we started round two. We already started round two.
Round one for Councillor Doze.
Sorry.
Round one for Councillor Doze.
Okay, we're moving on. Councillor Tan, followed by Councillor Carreras, and we are officially in round two, which started with Councillor Schiller.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Well, it moves on to me when I'm not as eloquent as Councillor Doze, so I understand the urgency for him to speak again. Thank you. And to follow up on Councillor Doze's point, please don't miss our excitement for all the questions we have about the zone. Please don't miss the fact that we are excited about the fact that we will have more opportunities for local and economic development, which I'm sure the many people who are spending 3 hours stuck on Lougheed Highway every day will be very happy to hear about. I think my questions are more on the making sure I understand where we're going, so that I can field the questions when they come in. Can you speak a little bit about the floodplain issue? If you could just verbally walk me through this. And pardon me, this has probably been discussed with previous councils, but just so I understand, how much of it is in the floodplain and not in floodplain? How much of this is close to the floodplain?
Through the chair, I'm going to hand that one off to engineering.
Thank you. And through the mayor to council. And so there is a section of this. It's this property is right next adjacent to the South Outlet floodplain. The floodplain from our records crosses a portion of the property, the northeast portion of the parcel. However, as any development in proximity to the floodplain, the developers would be required to retain a geotechnical engineer to review the flood risk and to design to accommodate it as required. And so that's a part of the process we deal with at the application stage. And we require the developer to determine how to best accommodate for those flooding concerns.
Okay, so in the event of large rains, will there be any access cut off to this area?
Sorry, in event of.
So it rains a lot, a bunch of the area is flooded. Is there any issues of access to the area?
Okay, thank you. And so, and from my understanding of the floodplain, we have adequate access down 232nd Street to 128. And so access to the Yenadin industrial or employment lands would be maintained in a flood scenario. Given that we are just on the outset of that, of the floodplain of the South Alouette, there would be that small interface piece that would need to be dealt with through design.
Thank you. And I think my last point is I just want to follow on something Councillor Youssef said about the FSR and the zone requirements. I think my understanding of that is I just want to make sure as well that we're not necessarily restrictive of businesses that need the space for their uses, that I understand that we have to absolutely comply what the community is asking for, but also making sure that the requirements that we put in line up with market demand and that businesses are able to use the space for what they need it for. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Those are my comments.
Thank you. I just wasn't sure if there wasn't a question in it, right?
It was more like is that I think I wanted to, thanks for the clarification. I just want to make sure, like, because I think from what I understood from Councillor Youssef, he asked about is the FSR requirements of 0.75 and like the setback requirements and the design code. I'm a design code expert. I can't read that and fully understand it. And then my understanding was staff said that that was in compliance with what the community was concerned about. And I think Councillor Youssef asked, is that what the market was asking for? And I just want to make sure, is there a check and balance here that whatever we put in here that there will actually be demand for in the market?
Through the chair, yes, the community component really comes through the uses and the sensitivity of the setbacks. When we start looking at the size of those future lots and the FSR, that's responding more so to what industry needs to be able to have a viable business. So yes.
Mr. Goddard.
In some of this work, it's important to note that we hear from local businesses all the time, and they're really looking for smaller 3,000 square foot businesses. And these are the things that we're trying to target for this place. These people will generally probably be local Maple Ridge folks expanding their businesses, as well as, wanting to stay in Maple Ridge. So they can conceivably live and work very near their offices in that smaller operation, smaller manufacturers, contractors, these sorts of things. So that's an advantage I think we're going to see here as well. I should remind council in Appendix A of the report, it's just 2 pages. It's a very good summary, a quick summary of the DP guidelines and the Yenadin plan. So if you wanted to read anything, that can quickly give you a good footing on what this is all about. And I would encourage you to look at those. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're going to move to Councillor Carreras.
Thank you. So the questions around transportation that came up earlier sort of tweaked. So I pulled up the current proposal of the active transportation plan. But it is something to think about around childcare centers, civic, educational, indoor recreation. So it looks like there's good transit. It looks like there is expansion of cycling proposed. It looks like there's expansion of sidewalks proposed within the active transportation plan. And so I'm curious, which are all really great things. They're definitely needed. And it looks like there's 15-minute bus route, like it's well serviced. I'm not as concerned about the transportation piece, because I think there's lots of good things. 2 questions. One is, what is the timing of the active transportation plan? Because it ties into some of these pieces. When is that coming back to us? And then the second piece is when we look at these people getting to and from with the active transportation plan, are there any proposals around upgrading the space around there? Because a lot of these areas that are being suggested involve children and youth, which is a good thing, but we need to make sure that they're able to access these in a safe way. And I think a lot of that will be via transit, walking, cycling. And so we want to make sure that the road network and the transportation network around there is safe for them to get there. So thank you.
Through the chair, engineering will speak to the strategic transportation.
I figured Mr. Smith would be coming up to get this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And through the mayor to council. And so we're just in the process here of working through the final stages of the STP. We anticipate those to be in front of council towards the end of this quarter, start of the next quarter. The plans that we have within the STP for the primary and secondary routes for the multimodal aspect of the plan, those tie with the design guidelines within the Yenadin employment land strategy. And so I think we're well covered there. And so the timing on when those are implemented will really depend on the timing of when development proceeds in the Yenadin area.
Okay. And sorry, does that involve the upgrades of the road? Like if kids are taking the bus and going north, that there's going to be a safe crossing for them to get to their dance class?
Yeah, absolutely. And so as part of the Yenadin employment lands that we're reviewing today, and as part of that application that we received for the corner lot to 232nd 128, there was a number of upgrades required as to that to improve that the crossing ability and the road cross section in that area. And so those requirements will be part of those developments.
Okay, thank you. I like I said earlier, I think there's a lot of great hub going on with the suggested uses. But let's just make sure that people can access it safely. But thank you.
Thank you very much. We're still on round 2. Are there any other comments or questions? No, then Councillor Tan, I will
Keep it brief.
indulge. Keep it brief, please.
Round three.
Round three.
I'd just like to say that I'm really excited about this idea of going to work in this industrial land, biking down to this area, going to work in this industrial land, going for a quick drink in a microbrewery, and then going rock climbing, or no, reverse rock climbing, and then going for a drink, and then taking the bus home, and all within a 10-minute commute. Love it.
All right, thank you very much. Seeing no further comments or questions or speakers, I will call the question. All those in favor of the recommendation, it is unanimous. And there, Councillor Dove, it is unanimous. Thank you very much. We're going to go to 5.2. However, we do have an update for 5.2.
Yes, sir. Through the chair, to the rest of council, I did check email and the applicant has withdrawn the appeal at this time. So we are going to skip past that item into the next item.
Okay, no correspondence? Adjourn.
We do have a closed council meeting
Okay.
immediately after this, so we can go to that. We are going to be closing under.
Okay. Perfect.
a
So
couple
seeing as
sections.
how we have no further business in open, we will adjourn and move to closed right away. Thank you.